Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Middle East Dialogue. This is our last session. We have Mr. Anthony Obershaw, who was Professor Emeritus from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he's going to present us the peace initiatives on the Israel and Palestinian conflict. Let's welcome Mr. Anthony Obershaw. I'm sorry, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
There we are.
Is this okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, well, it's been a long day and this is the end of it, so I will be very brief. But bare bones was what I present to you. Fleshed out presentation is on my website at this conference. So this will be just a brief statement outline. So the Gaza war will end sometime, and what I'm looking at is one outcome where both Israel and Palestinians, a government and a supporting public, commits to two states. Two-state solution is, of course, a phrase. It hides complexities, as the failure to implement the Oslo Accords demonstrated. Israel, Palestinians, and international advocates have to convince the Israeli and Palestinian people that the two-state solution is realistic, feasible, and will benefit them, and to be transparent about what it would cost and to whom. So what institutions will make, I think, for a stable peace? And here are some suggestions I make that obviously the negotiators will have to have the final word about all of this. Is a solution feasible after all this bitterness and warfare after 80 years? Consider Germany and France. They had 3 destructive wars over 80 years. Huge casualties, destruction, occupation atrocities, hate propaganda. But starting in the 1950s, they rid themselves of the burden of the past and became the joint cooperative pillars of the European Union. So things like this can have happened and can happen. Now, here are some suggestions, I believe. State boundaries. Israel's a permanent state. The new Palestinian state will be a permanent state. It will be made up of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. I think Gaza will have to be linked to the West Bank by a transit corridor that is controlled by the Palestinian state, in the same way or similar to the way West Berlin was linked to West Germany in the Cold War. So that's one. 2, security for Israel. Israel needs security guarantees and enforcement. Without that, a Palestinian state could become a springboard for more violence and war, with this time zero warming for defense. No Israeli government and public will take that risk. So what to do? I think the Palestinian state can become a permanent neutral state by international treaty, just like Switzerland is. There's no foreign military alliances, no foreign troops and bases, no supply of war material to belligerents, no transit to foreign forces, security forces with defensive weapons only, and an international inspection regime for weaponry. Neutrality has served Switzerland very well. Before neutrality in the 19th century, its main export was mercenaries for European rulers and wars. With neutrality, to become a prosperous, peaceful country, and also created humanitarian institutions like the Red Cross. All states have to conform to Swiss neutrality, including Switzerland itself, and that would apply to the Palestinian state. More details of that in my paper. Security for Palestinians would be that Israel has absolutely no incentive to attack a neutral, peaceful Palestinian state. Third point is Israeli settlements. A major obstacle to two states is the fate of some 700,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank, about 10% of the Israeli population. A forced displacement or involuntary displacement of all these settlers from their homes, I think, is a non-starter for building peace. But there are alternatives that benefit Palestinians and the settlers. Settlements can be leased for rent by Israel, by Palestine state to Israel. Most settlers do not have to be displaced. Most live there because of financial benefits and subsidies from the Israeli government. If most settlers can continue living in security, they will not oppose a Palestinian state, nor will the Israeli public. The rents will generate a considerable revenue state to make a viable Palestinian state. The alternative of a land swap has been considered years ago and was rejected by both Palestinians and Israelis. Now, this would apply, the rental situation would apply to the large compact blocks who will pay rent for the land they occupy on a long-term lease, somewhat like a model of Hong Kong that China leased to the UK. Of course, this won't be for 100 years, but Israel also leased agricultural land from Jordan after 1967 for several decades. So there's precedence for this. Under these long-term leases, Israelis would have a right to live under Israeli law in these leased spaces. With secure tenure and clear boundaries that cannot be expanded, the conflicts between settlers and Palestinian neighbors will cease. Of course, if both parties want it, additional land can be leased, as in the Jordan Valley. Now, the hundreds of small hilltop outposts will be evacuated to Israel. Without electricity, water, and supplies from Israel, they just can't survive on their own. And more details on this in my paper. For instance, the Jordanian agricultural settlements will become Palestinian farm enterprises on the model of thriving Gaza agriculture before 2007. Rental price can be determined by an amount equivalent by the equivalent value of land across the border from these settlements in Israel, and how the rent is paid to the Palestinian government, what share the settlers pay, what share the government and Israeli taxpayers pay. That's for the Israelis to decide. Next is the right to return. I think the right to return is given up by the recognition of Israel by the Palestinians. But I think it's a very important issue and has been for decades, and there should be some reparations and compensation as a matter of justice paid to individuals and families for specific harms along the model that the German reparations to Israeli citizens was, and the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So how this is organized, there's more on this in my paper, but the peace treaty and the establishment of the state of a Palestinian state should have some compensation for the right of return built into it, and part of rental stream from Israel paying the rents of the surviving settlements should be allocated to a fund that compensates families that renounce the right of return and accept a monetary settlement or some other benefit. Next item is Gaza reconstruction. Rebuilding Gaza, employing thousands of Gazans who used to work and fight for Hamas, Gaza's conversion from a military-industrial tunnel economy to a consumer economy, and eventually phasing out Gazans' dependence on food, health, education, on international agencies and outside donors. This will be a major undertaking. Nevertheless, the UN agencies and Hamas were the two largest employers in Gaza. Now, the estimate is that Hamas and other militants employed some 40,000 fighters, security and intelligence staff, and thousands more workers for building and running the tunnel economy. So both the surviving fighters and these employed and workers will have to be gainfully employed for a meaningful Palestinian state. Now, these thousands have been trained and employed in the Hamas tunnel economy for building and construction, electricity, air cooling, ventilation, weapons manufacture, use of machine tools, transportation, and other skills. These skills can be employed in consumer industries like building motorcycles, refrigerators, and cooling systems. So Gaza does not lack entrepreneurs either. With international financing, reconstruction, and the domestic consumer industry can be created in a relatively short time. I have some more ideas about how to do this in my paper, but I'm pressed for time and I'm not going to consider that. One important thing in the physical reconstruction, financing, management, and labor for Gaza reconstruction can be done, as the Russian did in Grozny after the Chechen capital was totally wiped out and was then totally reconstructed. So this can be done, this can be managed both with internal and outside financial help. Finally, the reconstruction and the building confidence and legitimacy for the Palestinian state so to say, go hand in hand. There can be a dignified public surrender of weapons in a military ceremony to former fighters in exchange for a right to residence and employment that marks their transition from warfare to peace. But again, more details in my paper. Finally, the Palestinian economy has to achieve a viable, the state has to be viable, the economy has to be viable. The strongest incentive for peace is economic benefits and security to the Palestinian people. A failed state is vulnerable to rejectionists, and Israel has an equally strong incentive for supporting Palestinian viability to assure peace by its neighbor. Two states and two people can coexist and prosper in what is a potential economic common market linked by labor migration, Israeli investments in West Bank industries, joint industrial free trade zones, joint water, agriculture, communication, and transportation, port facilities. This was considered in 2009 by Prime Minister Olmert and Abbas. Described the advantages of a single business ecosystem in Palestine. And I think that is true for 2020 and will be supported by the World Bank and Arab states, the EU, the US, and other states for building economic development. And again, the revenue from settler rents will contribute a good chunk of money for this on the Palestinian side. These are just some of the core issues. Another obvious one, a big one, is East Jerusalem, the capital of Palestine state, how to make it real, and the institutions for a functioning Jerusalem, two capitals, one city that avoids the kind of divided city like East and West Berlin in the Cold War. Well, these are my quick suggestions. You can read more about them in my paper. The difficult work of negotiation and compromise will be the responsibility of the negotiators, of course. But the peoples of Israel and Palestine will have the final say with ratification of these negotiations and an international treaty establishing and recognizing both states. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any question from the online participant? You can either text your question in the chat box or raise your hand and I will get you on the podium. Okay. You may unmute yourself and start speaking, Mr. Farahad.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the lecture and new ideas. Some of them can be called out of the box and may lead to a viable and near fair solution. I just want to make sure that are we tailoring the solutions to look fair, but mostly to be convenient for Israel for one side? This is because it is the stronger side. One can say practically no solution would happen without Israeli approval. So this is a question related to honesty. This is number one. Number two, how about the Golan Heights? Should it be returned to Syria or not? Number three, marine rights related to natural gas in front of Gaza and underground water of Gaza. Should that be exclusively Palestinian rights or not? Number 4, how about the connection between Gaza and the West Bank? If there is a Palestinian state, would it be through air only, or there must be some sort of roadway connecting the two? There are other questions, but I think I would stop here. Thank you very much.
Well, obviously, there's a roadway that will connect the two with free transit from Gaza to the West Bank and back and forth. As for the Palestine will be a sovereign state, so the rights to the waters and the ground and the natural gas and the whatever's under its soil belongs to the Palestinians. Up to them to manage it the way they want. Let me see what else.
You want to know if this was something that benefited Israel instead of the Palestinians and all of them.
Oh, what? Why would Israel agree to such an agreement? Well, if the Palestinian state accepts neutrality, and that's recognized internationally, like Switzerland was recognized by the in the Treaty of Vienna in 1815, and then by the UN, by the League of Nations, and by the United Nations. It's a peaceful state. So that's what Israel wants. It wants a peaceful neighbor. And it doesn't want to remain a militarized state to have to defend itself against various outside forces. Plus, I think that Iran will sort of lose its an incentive. If the Palestinians accept a Palestinian state and Israel accepts that Palestinian state, what can Iran demand on behalf of the Palestinians? I mean, the whole reason for its intervention in that area is kind of evaporates as far as I'm concerned. And then I didn't talk about Jerusalem as the holy city because that's, would add another 10 minutes to this presentation. But there are plans to make Jerusalem not only one city, two capitals, but internationally accessible to all the religions that consider it a holy city. And that can continue as far as I'm concerned, and should continue.
Golan Heights, and the borders of the two states.
Golan Heights and the border of the two states.
What?
He wants to know about Golan Heights and the border of the. He has difficulty hearing, so I'm repeating.
Okay, the Golan Heights is something for Israel and Syria to settle. You don't want to complicate the creation of a Palestinian state with additional issues, but Israel and Syria will have to settle that themselves. It could remain outside the framework of the creation of a Palestinian state.
Thank you. Is there any other additional questions? Or would you like to add some closing remarks?
You want to add some closing remarks? Tony?
Oh, my remarks, and I really, there are suggestions for the negotiators to look at with some suggestions about what the outcome should be on particular issues. The real work is that of the peacemakers in Israel and among the Palestinians and in the new Palestinian state. They will have to work this out. All I can do as an outsider is to put something on the agenda and make some suggestions that I don't see in the literature on what the two-state solution would be like. And I think the public in Palestine and in Israel should have a pretty good idea of what's coming down the line and what the benefits are and who pays it and who pays for what. And that's what I'm trying to do in this brief talk.
Thank you, thank you. We will have a closing remark of the Middle East dialogue at 4:40, and this session is over. And you may join our closing remark later. Thank you for coming, and see you next year. Bye-bye.